The only thing more dangerous than a vampire king who hated humans was the moment he realized there was one human he could never bring himself to destroy. The moon hung low over Blackstone Forest, washing the ancient pines in silver light as cold mist drifted between their trunks like silent ghosts. At the heart of the forest stood the Obsidian Citadel, a fortress so old that even history had forgotten who laid its first stone. For 600 years, every kingdom around it had whispered the same warning to their children. Stay away from the forest after sunset. If the Vampire King finds you, no one will ever hear your name again. Inside the towering hall of black marble, hundreds of crimson candles burned without flickering. Their pale glow reflected across polished floors where armored guards stood motionless, their eyes fixed upon the throne carved from a single block of volcanic stone. Seated upon it was King Lucian Ashford. His face was impossibly pale, sharper than any sculpture, framed by dark hair that seemed to swallow the candlelight itself. His silver-gray eyes remained fixed on the young woman kneeling several feet away. Chains rested loosely around her wrists, though they hardly seemed necessary. She looked exhausted rather than dangerous. Dust clung to the hem of her faded blue dress, and her worn boots were still stained with dried mud from the forest trail. A loose strand of chestnut hair fell across her face as she lowered her eyes, refusing to beg. The silence inside the throne room grew heavier with every passing second. Members of the royal council watched from their elevated seats, waiting for the inevitable. Human trespassers never left the citadel alive. They never had. One elderly noble slowly rose from his chair, his deep crimson cloak brushing across the stone floor. "Your Majesty," he said calmly, "the law has never changed. She crossed our border. She has seen our kingdom. The sentence must be carried out." A quiet chorus of agreement echoed through the chamber. Lucian said nothing. His expression remained unreadable as he slowly stood from his throne. Even without speaking, his presence seemed to cool the air itself. Every guard instinctively straightened. Every council member lowered their eyes. Clara Bennett heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching across the marble floor. She finally lifted her head. This was the first time she truly saw him. Not the monster described in frightened village stories. Not the shadow blamed for every disappearance beyond the forest. He looked almost human. Calm. Regal. Ageless. Yet there was something behind his eyes that no human could ever possess. Centuries of loneliness rested there like winter that refused to end. Lucian stopped only a few feet away. His gaze settled on Clara with quiet certainty. He had sentenced kings, generals, hunters, and assassins without hesitation. Humans had brought war to his people. Humans had broken every peace ever offered. Mercy had become a luxury he buried centuries ago. This decision should have been no different. He slowly reached for the ceremonial blade resting beside his throne. The polished silver reflected the candlelight as he drew it free. The chamber held its breath. Clara closed her eyes. Somewhere beyond the towering walls, thunder rolled across the distant mountains. The blade rose steadily in Lucian's hand. One final movement would fulfill the oldest law of the kingdom. But as the tip drifted toward the frightened young woman before him, something impossible happened. His arm stopped. Not because of hesitation. Not because of pity. It simply would not move another inch. Lucian's fingers tightened around the silver hilt, but the blade refused to move any closer. It was as though an invisible hand had seized his arm, locking every muscle in place. A faint vibration traveled through the weapon, spreading into his wrist before fading into the cold air. The throne room remained perfectly still. No one breathed. No one spoke. Even the endless flames dancing upon the crimson candles seemed to pause. Clara slowly opened her eyes, expecting to find the edge of the blade waiting for her. Instead, she found the Vampire King standing motionless, his expression no longer carved from stone. For the first time since entering the citadel, she saw uncertainty crossing his face. It lasted only a heartbeat, but everyone in the chamber noticed it. Lucian Ashford had never hesitated. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Lord Cashin stepped forward, disbelief filling his voice. "Your Majesty?" Lucian did not answer. His attention remained fixed on the young woman before him. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance. Her simple dress had been stitched and repaired more than once. Her boots had traveled countless miles across muddy roads. Her hands carried the faint calluses of honest work. She smelled of fresh bread, cedar smoke, and rain instead of fear. None of it made sense. Why could he not finish what centuries of law demanded? Slowly, he lowered the blade. Gasps echoed throughout the chamber. Clara blinked in confusion. She had prepared herself for the end only moments ago. Now the impossible silence felt even heavier. Lucian finally turned toward his counsel. His voice remained calm, yet every word carried the quiet authority of someone who had ruled longer than most kingdoms had existed. "Leave us." Several nobles stared at him as though they had misheard. Lord Cashin frowned. "Your Majesty, she is human." "I am aware. She cannot remain alive." Lucian's silver eyes settled upon the old noble. "I said leave us." No one challenged him again. One by one, the council members rose from their carved seats. Their embroidered robes whispered across the marble floor as they disappeared through the towering doors. The royal guards hesitated only briefly before following, though many glanced back at Clara with open suspicion. Within moments the vast throne room became almost silent. Only the crackling candles and distant thunder remained. Clara swallowed carefully. "Are you going to ask me who I am?" she said quietly. Lucian looked at her without expression. "I already know your name." Her eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Clara Bennett. 22 years old. Baker's assistant in the village of Ashbrook. You deliver bread every Tuesday and Friday before sunrise. You have lived there since childhood." Clara stared at him. "How could you possibly know that?" Lucian did not answer immediately. Instead, he slowly returned the ceremonial sword to its place beside the throne. "Because my kingdom has watched every road surrounding these mountains for generations." Clara felt a chill despite the warmth of the candles. "Then, you knew humans were nearby all this time?" "Knowing is different from interfering." She lowered her gaze, trying to steady her breathing. "If you knew everything about me, then you also know I did not come here to cause trouble." Lucian studied her quietly. Something about her voice tugged at a memory buried so deeply that he could not grasp it. Not a face. Not a place. Only the strange feeling that he had heard that calm honesty somewhere long before this night. He dismissed the thought immediately. Impossible. 6 centuries had taught him never to trust impossible things. Yet another question now echoed louder than any law ever written. If she was simply an ordinary human, why had fate itself refused to let him end her life? The towering doors remained closed, sealing the throne room in a silence so complete that Clara could hear the distant ticking of an ancient clock hidden somewhere beyond the stone walls. She shifted carefully, her tired legs aching after hours of uncertainty, yet the chains around her wrists had already begun to feel strangely unnecessary. Lucian noticed the slight movement. With a simple gesture, the iron restraints unlocked and slipped to the polished floor without anyone touching them. Clara rubbed her wrists, surprised more by the unexpected kindness than by her freedom. "You are letting me go?" she asked cautiously. Lucian looked toward the stained glass windows where dawn's first faint light had begun to soften the endless darkness outside. "Not yet." Clara's shoulders tensed again. "Then what happens now?" He remained silent for several moments before answering. "You tell me why you entered Blackstone Forest." She lowered her eyes, embarrassed by how ordinary the truth sounded. "I was delivering bread to Pine Hollow." Lucian raised an eyebrow. "The old bridge washed away after last week's storm. I thought I could save time by crossing the forest." She managed a small, nervous smile. It was a terrible decision. Something about her honesty felt unfamiliar. Humans brought before his throne usually arrived with carefully prepared lies, desperate bargains, or frightened excuses. Clara offered none of those. She simply answered every question exactly as it happened. "Did you know this forest belonged to my kingdom?" Lucian asked. She nodded slowly. "Everyone back home knows the stories. And yet you entered anyway. Because stories do not feed hungry families." The words settled between them with unexpected weight. Lucian studied her face. There was no defiance there. Only quiet exhaustion and the determination of someone who had learned long ago that fear could never replace responsibility. "Who depends on you?" he asked. Clara seemed surprised by the question. "My younger sister, Emily." Her expression softened immediately at the mention of the name. "She is 12 years old. Ever since our parents passed away during the winter fever 5 years ago, it has been just the two of us." She looked toward the floor again. "If I do not work, she does not eat." Lucian remained perfectly still, yet something inside him shifted ever so slightly. 6 centuries of watching kingdoms rise and fall had taught him countless lessons about ambition, greed, and power. But the simple devotion in Clara's voice reminded him of something almost forgotten. Long before he became king, before wars hardened every promise, there had been a time when protecting family meant more than protecting crowns. Before he could speak again, the enormous doors suddenly opened. Commander Rowan entered with measured steps, his silver armor gleaming beneath the candlelight. He stopped several feet away before bowing deeply. "Your Majesty, the council has gathered again." Lucian did not look away from Clara. They moved quickly. Rowan hesitated. "They believe delaying judgment places the kingdom at risk." Clara quietly stepped backward. "If my staying here is causing trouble, then let me leave. I promise I will never tell anyone what I saw." Rowan's expression revealed immediate disbelief. No human had ever walked freely out of the citadel. The law simply did not allow it. Lucian slowly turned toward the commander. "Prepare the East Tower." Rowan looked up in confusion. "Your Majesty?" "She will remain there as my personal guest until I understand why the ancient laws themselves intervened." Even Rowan, who had served the Vampire King for more than 2 centuries, could not hide his astonishment. As Clara stared at Lucian, she realized that her fate had changed again. She was no longer a prisoner awaiting judgment. She had become the greatest mystery inside a kingdom that had feared no mystery for 600 years. Commander Rowan led Clara through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly beneath soaring stone arches. Morning light filtered through narrow windows, painting silver lines across polished floors that reflected centuries of quiet history. The citadel felt less like a fortress and more like a city hidden inside a mountain. Servants moved silently through the halls carrying books, flowers, and trays of fresh bread. Clara had expected chains, dark cells, and constant fear. Instead she found order, discipline, and an unsettling calm that challenged every frightening story she had ever heard. They climbed a winding staircase until Rowan stopped before a pair of carved oak doors. He pushed them open without a word. The chamber beyond overlooked the eastern cliffs where endless forests disappeared beneath drifting clouds. A fireplace glowed softly despite the summer morning. Fresh clothes rested neatly on the bed. A breakfast tray waited beside the window with warm bread, fresh berries, herbal tea, and honey. Clara stared in disbelief. "This is for me?" Rowan nodded once. "His Majesty ordered that you be treated with respect." Clara stepped cautiously inside. "Why?" The commander remained standing in the doorway, his expression calm but thoughtful. "That is the same question everyone in this kingdom is asking." Before she could answer, he closed the doors, leaving her alone with a silence far gentler than the one inside the throne room. Meanwhile, deep beneath the citadel, the royal council gathered inside the Hall of Ancients. Massive stone pillars surrounded a circular chamber where every ruler of the Ashford bloodline had once sworn the same sacred oath. Lord Cashin struck the marble floor with his staff. "This cannot continue," he declared. "The law exists to protect our people." Another noble leaned forward. "The king has never ignored the ancient code before." Murmurs spread through the chamber like distant thunder. Lucian entered without announcement. The voices stopped immediately. Every council member rose. He walked to the center of the room, his dark coat moving gently behind him before he faced the assembly. Lord Cashin wasted no time. "Your Majesty, every hour that human remains inside these walls weakens confidence in the crown." Lucian folded his hands behind his back. "Confidence built upon fear is fragile." The elder noble frowned. "This is not about fear. It is about tradition." Lucian's silver eyes settled upon the ancient stone circle beneath his feet. "Then explain the tradition to me." Confusion crossed several faces. Cashin answered carefully. "Humans who discover our kingdom cannot leave alive." "Why?" Lucian asked quietly. The council exchanged uncertain glances. The question seemed almost impossible. Finally one scholar spoke. "Because that is the law written by the first king." Lucian nodded slowly. "And why did the first king write it?" Silence answered him. No one could remember. The law had survived for centuries, but its original purpose had disappeared into forgotten history. Lucian continued, his voice measured and calm. "Last night the law itself prevented its own sentence from being carried out." Several nobles lowered their eyes. They had all witnessed the impossible moment. "Until I understand why," Lucian said, "no judgment will be made." Lord Cashin's expression hardened. "Then allow the royal archives to be opened." Lucian looked toward him. "You believe the answer lies there?" "If the old magic intervened, the oldest records may explain it." For the first time that morning, Lucian found himself agreeing. Somewhere beneath centuries of dust and forgotten parchment, there had to be a reason why fate had chosen one ordinary young woman over every king, warrior, and ruler who had walked these halls before. Far above, Clara stood by the tall eastern window watching sunlight spread across the endless forest. She had no way of knowing that while she wondered how to return home to her little sister, the greatest scholars of an immortal kingdom were about to search 600 years of forgotten history for a single answer that might change both of their worlds forever. The royal archives had not been opened in nearly 80 years. Hidden beneath the oldest wing of the citadel, the enormous library stretched farther than Clara could have imagined, although she had never seen it herself. Endless shelves disappeared into the shadows, filled with leather-bound volumes, brittle scrolls, and forgotten journals that carried the memories of countless generations. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight as elderly scholars carefully unlocked sealed cabinets one after another. Every page they turned carried the weight of history. Lucian stood quietly beside the largest reading table while Chief Archivist Elias adjusted a pair of small silver spectacles. Unlike the warriors and nobles surrounding the king, Elias possessed no great physical strength. His greatest weapon had always been knowledge. "Your Majesty," the old scholar said softly, "the oldest records rarely speak directly. They speak through fragments." Lucian nodded once. "Then we begin with the oldest fragments." For hours the silence was broken only by the gentle sound of turning pages. Ancient maps covered the table beside faded royal family trees and weathered journals written in languages few living souls could still read. Every reference to the first king, forgotten treaties, and magical covenants was examined with painstaking care. Yet nothing explained why an ordinary human girl had become impossible for the vampire king to execute. As another heavy volume was placed before him, Elias suddenly stopped. His wrinkled fingers rested upon an illustration drawn centuries earlier. It showed a king standing before a glowing tree while a young woman faced him with empty hands. Time had faded most of the ink, but one sentence remained surprisingly clear. Elias slowly translated the ancient language aloud. When the crown is ruled by hatred alone, the forest shall choose a heart untouched by vengeance. The room grew still. Lucian stepped closer. Continue. Elias carefully traced the next line. The chosen one will enter without seeking power, without carrying conquest, and without fearing sacrifice. Lord Cashin frowned. That sounds like a legend, not history. Elias gently shook his head. This manuscript predates the founding of our current kingdom. Legends often become laws after enough centuries pass. Lucian remained focused on the faded illustration. The words echoed inside his thoughts. A heart untouched by vengeance. He remembered Clara's answers inside the throne room. She had not entered the forest searching for treasure. She had not crossed the border to spy. She had simply carried bread home because her younger sister depended upon her. The coincidence unsettled him more than any prophecy could. At that very moment, Clara wandered carefully through the East Tower garden under the watchful eyes of two silent guards. Roses climbed ancient stone walls while white doves rested peacefully beside a marble fountain. She bent down to help a tiny bird whose wing had become tangled between flowering vines. With patient hands she carefully loosened the branches until the frightened creature fluttered into the bright morning sky. One of the guards watched in quiet surprise. Most prisoners searched for escape. Clara had stopped only to help a bird she would never see again. High above the garden balcony, Lucian happened to glance outside while leaving the archives. His eyes followed the white dove as it circled once above Clara before disappearing into the endless blue sky. Something inside him stirred again, not because of magic, but because the smallest acts often revealed the deepest truths. Behind him, Elias hurried from the library carrying another weathered scroll. His normally steady voice now carried unmistakable urgency. "Your Majesty," he called. "I believe I have found the missing page, and if this record is genuine, then the young woman is not the only one chosen by the ancient covenant. It appears the prophecy has always been about the king as well." Lucian accepted the brittle scroll with careful hands, as though one careless movement might erase the final voice of an age that no longer existed. The faded parchment crackled softly while Elias adjusted the lantern beside the reading table. Several symbols had almost disappeared beneath the passing centuries, yet enough remained for the old scholar to continue. He read slowly, translating each ancient phrase into modern words. When the chosen heart enters the kingdom, the crown shall face its final trial. The king must choose between ruling through fear or leading through compassion. Only one path will preserve the future. Silence settled over the archive once again. Lord Cashin folded his arms. Ancient riddles have misled rulers before. Elias shook his head. This is not a riddle. It is written beside the original royal seal. That mark was only used for sacred covenants. Lucian lowered his eyes to the weathered page. Beneath the faded text stood an illustration of two hands reaching toward one another across a circle of silver leaves. One belonged to a crowned figure. The other belonged to someone dressed in simple clothing, without jewels or rank. At the bottom of the page, one final sentence remained untouched by time. The chosen heart will never seek the throne, yet the throne will seek the chosen heart. Lucian quietly rolled the scroll closed. No one outside this room learns of these writings. Every scholar nodded immediately. Even Cashin offered no argument. If the prophecy became public, fear alone could divide the kingdom before any answers were found. Meanwhile, Clara spent the afternoon helping one of the elderly kitchen servants gather fresh herbs growing along the eastern courtyard. The woman, whose name was Martha, smiled warmly despite knowing her unusual guest had become the center of every whispered conversation inside the citadel. "You have never complained once," Martha observed while placing rosemary into a woven basket. Clara smiled gently. "Complaining has never baked bread or solved a problem." Martha laughed quietly. "You remind me of someone." Clara looked up with curiosity. "Who?" The older woman paused. The Queen. Clara blinked in surprise. The Vampire Queen? Martha nodded slowly. She passed away many years ago, long before I arrived, but those who served her said she believed kindness was stronger than fear. Clara lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. She had never imagined kindness and vampires belonging in the same sentence. As they returned toward the kitchen, two young servants accidentally dropped a heavy wooden crate filled with fresh apples. Bright red fruit rolled across the stone courtyard in every direction. Before anyone could react, Clara set down her own basket and hurried to help gather every apple, smiling as embarrassed servants rushed to join her. Soon even the palace guards found themselves collecting runaway fruit beneath the afternoon sun. Laughter quietly replaced nervous silence. From the upper balcony, Lucian happened to witness the unexpected scene while discussing military reports with Commander Rowan. Neither servant nor guard seemed to notice the king watching them. They were too busy smiling at a human who had somehow turned an awkward accident into a moment of simple joy. Rowan followed Lucian's gaze. She has changed the mood of the East Wing in less than a day, he observed. Lucian remained thoughtful. People reveal themselves most clearly when they believe no one important is watching. At that exact moment, Clara handed the last apple to a young servant who could not have been older than Emily. The girl thanked her with a grateful smile before running back inside. Lucian felt an unfamiliar stillness settle over his thoughts. The prophecy had spoken of a heart untouched by vengeance. Watching Clara expect nothing in return for her kindness, he found himself wondering whether the ancient covenant had chosen her because of some hidden magic, or because compassion itself had become the rarest power left in either the human world or his own. That evening the citadel felt different. The corridors remained quiet as always, yet the silence carried expectation instead of certainty. Whispers traveled behind closed doors. Servants paused their conversations whenever members of the royal council walked past. Even the palace guards found themselves glancing toward the East Tower more often than their assigned patrols required. News spread quickly inside ancient walls, and although no official announcement had been made, everyone knew one impossible truth. A human had spent an entire day inside the Vampire King's home and was still alive. Clara stood beside the tall window of her chamber watching the sun disappear beyond the endless sea of pine trees. Somewhere beyond that horizon waited Ashbrook, the little bakery, and 12-year-old Emily, who was probably wondering why her sister had never returned. The thought tightened her chest. She whispered softly, almost to herself. "Please be all right." A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Martha entered carrying a folded blanket and a small wooden box. His Majesty ordered these delivered. Clara looked surprised. "More gifts?" Martha smiled kindly. "Not gifts. Necessities." Clara opened the box and found writing paper, ink, and several envelopes. "You may write to your sister," Martha explained. "Our fastest riders can deliver letters beyond the forest before sunrise." Clara's eyes immediately filled with relief. "Thank you." "Do not thank me," Martha replied. "Thank the king." After the elderly servant quietly left the room, Clara sat beside the fireplace and began writing. Every word came naturally. She told Emily not to worry. She promised she was safe. She reminded her to feed the chickens before school and to ask Mrs. Carter next door for fresh milk if necessary. She never mentioned vampires. She never mentioned the citadel. She simply ended the letter the way she always had. "I will come home. I promise." At nearly the same moment, Lucian stood alone upon the western balcony overlooking the kingdom he had ruled for 6 centuries. Night slowly covered the mountains while thousands of lanterns glowed inside distant villages under his protection. Commander Rowan approached quietly before stopping several feet behind him. "The messenger is prepared," Rowan reported. Lucian nodded. "Deliver her letter without opening it." Rowan hesitated. "Without inspection?" Lucian turned slightly. Has she given us any reason to distrust her? The commander answered honestly. No, your majesty. Then neither shall we give her a reason to distrust us. Rowan bowed before leaving with the sealed envelope. Lucian watched him disappear into the darkness below. Trust. It was a word he had not considered in centuries. Long ago he had trusted allies who became enemies and treaties that became broken promises. Time had slowly replaced trust with caution until caution became habit. Yet one ordinary young woman had written only to comfort her little sister instead of asking for rescue or revenge. It unsettled him more deeply than any battlefield ever had. Far below the balcony, Lord Cashin stood hidden beneath the shadow of an ancient archway. His sharp eyes followed the royal messenger riding through the main gate and disappearing into the forest. His expression darkened. He has already begun treating her differently, he murmured. A younger noble standing beside him lowered his voice. If the prophecy changes him, what becomes of the kingdom? Cashin's answer came without hesitation. Then we must discover whether the prophecy can be stopped before it changes them both. Above them, Lucian remained unaware of the quiet conversation unfolding beneath the balcony. His attention had drifted toward the east tower where one window still glowed warmly against the night. Behind that single light sat the young woman who had unknowingly stepped into a destiny older than either of their worlds. And somewhere deep inside the citadel, where forgotten passages connected the oldest foundations, a hidden chamber remained sealed by silver stone, waiting for the day when both names spoken in the ancient covenant would finally stand before its door. Morning arrived beneath a sky washed in pale gold, yet the citadel carried an unusual sense of anticipation. Clara had barely finished breakfast when Commander Rowan appeared outside her chamber. His expression remained respectful, but there was a seriousness in his silver eyes that she had not seen before. His Majesty requests your presence, he said. Clara stood immediately. Am I finally allowed to go home? Rowan hesitated for only a moment. There are still questions that require answers. She nodded quietly and followed him through corridors that seemed strangely familiar now. Servants greeted her with polite smiles instead of fearful stares. A few even offered small bows before continuing their work. Clara found the sudden change almost unsettling. She had arrived as an outsider. Somehow, in only 2 days, she had become someone the palace no longer treated as an enemy. Rowan guided her beyond the grand hall and through a narrow passage she had never noticed before. Massive stone doors slowly opened, revealing a peaceful courtyard hidden deep within the oldest part of the citadel. Ancient oak trees stretched their branches above a crystal-clear pond where white lilies floated without a ripple. It felt untouched by time. Lucian stood alone beside the water, his hands resting behind his back as sunlight reflected softly across the surface. He turned as Clara approached. Thank you for coming. She offered a polite smile. I do not think I had much choice. For the first time, a faint trace of amusement appeared in Lucian's eyes. Perhaps not. They walked slowly along the edge of the pond. Neither spoke for several moments. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. Birds sang from the branches overhead while a gentle breeze carried the scent of cedar and wildflowers through the hidden garden. Finally Clara glanced toward him. Did my letter reach my sister? Lucian nodded. Before sunrise. Relief immediately softened her face. Thank you. He studied her expression carefully. You trust my word rather easily. Clara considered the question before answering. You could have refused. You did not. She looked toward the water. People usually reveal who they are through small choices. Lucian repeated her words quietly to himself. Small choices. For centuries he had judged kingdoms through wars, rulers through victories, and enemies through betrayals. She judged people by whether they kept simple promises. Before either could continue, a low rumbling sound echoed beneath their feet. The peaceful pond suddenly shimmered as circles spread across the perfectly still water. every white lily slowly turned toward the center at the exact same moment. Clara stopped walking. Did you feel that? Lucian had already drawn his attention toward the ancient stone monument rising beyond the trees. Symbols carved into its surface had begun glowing with a soft silver light. Commander Rowan rushed into the courtyard only seconds later. Your Majesty. His normally calm voice carried unmistakable urgency. The inner sanctuary has awakened. Lucian's expression hardened. That chamber has remained sealed for centuries. Rowan nodded. The Guardians report that the entrance opened by itself. Clara looked from one man to the other, completely confused. What is the inner sanctuary? Neither answered immediately. Lucian instead turned toward the glowing monument where the silver symbols continued shining brighter with every passing second. He had walked these grounds countless times across 600 years. Never once had the ancient sanctuary responded to his presence. Yet today it had awakened while Clara stood only a few steps away. Rowan lowered his voice. The old records were true. Lucian slowly looked toward Clara. She had done nothing except stand quietly beside the pond, unaware that the air itself seemed to respond to her presence. The king remembered the final sentence Elias had translated only hours before. The chosen heart will never seek the throne, yet the throne will seek the chosen heart. As the ancient monument released another pulse of silver light across the hidden garden, Lucian realized the prophecy was no longer waiting inside forgotten books. It had begun unfolding before their very eyes. The silver light spread across the hidden sanctuary like the first rays of dawn touching a frozen lake. Ancient symbols shimmered along the towering stone walls, awakening one after another until the entire courtyard glowed with quiet brilliance. Clara stood speechless, instinctively taking a single step backward. I did not do anything, she whispered. Lucian looked at her calmly. I know. His voice remained steady, but deep within him questions multiplied faster than answers. Commander Rowan carefully approached the entrance of the sanctuary, where a pair of massive stone doors had slowly separated just enough to reveal a narrow passage illuminated by soft silver light. No one remembered seeing those doors open before. Even the oldest records described them only as sealed by the first king himself. Elias arrived moments later, breathing heavily after climbing the ancient stairs. His eyes widened the instant he saw the open entrance. Impossible, he murmured. Every generation believed this chamber was symbolic. Lucian turned toward the elderly scholar. Can you read the inscription? Elias stepped closer, brushing centuries of dust from the carved stone with careful hands. As the hidden words became visible beneath his fingertips, his expression slowly changed from curiosity to astonishment. He translated each sentence aloud. Only when the crown learns mercy and the chosen heart remains unbroken shall the path be revealed. Neither may walk alone, for the covenant belongs to both. Silence followed the final words. Clara looked at Lucian in confusion. What does that mean? Before anyone could answer, a gentle breeze drifted through the sanctuary although there was no open sky above it. The silver light gathered near the center of the chamber, slowly forming the shape of a magnificent tree carved entirely from crystal. Its branches shimmered with countless tiny leaves that reflected memories rather than sunlight. Clara stepped closer without fear. As she reached the tree, one crystal leaf floated gently downward and landed in the palm of her hand. Instead of remaining solid, it transformed into a single glowing image. She saw a young man standing beneath the very same tree hundreds of years earlier. Although he wore an ancient royal cloak instead of modern clothing, she recognized him immediately. It was Lucian, long before sorrow had settled into his eyes. Standing beside him was a smiling queen dressed in simple white, offering bread to a group of traveling children gathered beneath the crystal branches. The vision faded almost as quickly as it had appeared. Clara looked toward Lucian with quiet surprise. She believed kindness mattered. Lucian lowered his eyes. She did. His voice carried a softness no one present had ever heard before. She believed a ruler was measured not by the fear he inspired, but by the hope he protected. Elias slowly closed the ancient manuscript in his hands. Then perhaps the covenant was never meant to create a bond between strangers. Perhaps it was meant to remind every generation of the promise the crown had forgotten. Lord Cashin, who had quietly entered the sanctuary behind the others, remained silent as he watched the king. For the first time, even he could not deny what stood before him. Nothing about Clara suggested ambition or power. She had not changed the citadel through magic or force. She had changed it simply by remaining true to herself. Lucian turned toward Clara as the last rays of silver light slowly faded into the crystal tree. When you entered this forest, you believed you had lost your way. Clara smiled gently. I still think I did. Lucian looked beyond the sanctuary toward the kingdom stretching beneath the morning sky. Perhaps, he said quietly, both of our worlds had been lost for a very long time. Above them, the crystal leaves shimmered one final time before becoming still once more, and in that peaceful silence the oldest kingdom in the mountains quietly began its first new chapter in 600 years, proving that even the coldest heart can remember its humanity when it is met not with fear, but with unwavering kindness.